When you walk into any environment, when you walk through the threshold of the door, you have cognitive, precognitive, subconscious reactions to the space. You know, that gut feeling that you have. That's your body telling your mind about what it's anticipating the experience to be. Some environments may make you feel good and give you that extra spring in your step, and others suck the life out. There is no such thing as neutral space.
This is the Mass Timber Group Show. I'm Nick.
And I'm Brady, and we talk to sustainable building experts. Today we caught up with Tye Farrow, one of the world's most prominent practitioners and advocates for human-built environments that enrich our lives through the intersection of neuroscience and architecture. He's a senior partner at Farrow Partners Architecture and the first Canadian architect to have earned a Master of Neuroscience applied to architectural design. He also has a Master of Architecture in Urban Design from Harvard. He's a highly sought-after speaker that's presented to world-class institutions in over 40 cities across 6 continents, including the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine and the Mayo Clinic.
Farrow Partners have designed and delivered projects located across Canada and around the globe valued at over $3 billion. Their mass timber projects are truly incredible and awe-inspiring. I guarantee you haven't seen anything like them before, especially the Helmsley Cancer Center, also called the Butterfly, in Jerusalem. But even more exciting is the release of Tye's brand new book, Constructing Health: How the Environment Enhances Mind Health. It takes an in-depth look at the relationships between the places we create, enhanced mind health, and human performance. This episode was filled with the science and the data behind the health benefits of timber buildings.
But before we jump in, if you want to learn more about creating enriching spaces with mass timber and network with world-class experts like Tye, and maybe even Tye himself, we just announced the 2024 Residential Mass Timber Summit taking place in Denver. Head on over to the website to learn more and get on our waiting list. The event will fill up quick. So with that, let's get into it.
Well, Tye, thank you so much for joining us. You are marching ahead for your big book release, Constructing Health: How the Environment Enhances Mind and Health. And one of the passages that blew my mind was the average North American spends 87% of their life indoors, which translates into less than 1 day per week outdoors. In fact, we spend more time inside buildings than some whale species spend underwater. What do you want to educate people about, and what are you most excited about this book?
Well, Nick, it's great to be here with you on your podcast. I'm looking forward to our discussion. The stat that you just read is from a professor in the United States, and I came across it, and I found it was amazing also because it really begins to show how much time we spend indoors, but with the analogy to the whale, that I think the whale might often spend more time in a more interesting environment than, in fact, a lot of us do in the buildings we inhabit. The purpose of the book is to do one thing solely that we're laser focused on, which is beginning to connect the dots for all of us on the relationship of what we build and how it can create the conditions of which we can thrive. And what do I mean by that? Well, all of the information that comes into us comes in through our brains, our minds. And we often think of spaces that we create as doing something, meaning they're functional, that they hold a program, where you learn or where you work or where you live or and often they seem a little transactional. And what I mean by that is the analogy of, say, a hamburger, in the sense that, a hamburger is very functional. You don't need a knife and a fork. You don't need a plate. You can hold it in your hands and you can consume it. And it does its purpose. It gives you some protein, some calories. But arguably what it does after an hour is it leaves you feeling empty. And more so, the chances are it probably does a lot of bad things from you, maybe if it's from a fast food shop, because of the sodium content or the other things in it that, in fact, it leaves you in worse shape after you've consumed it and before you had it. And so it's transactional. And I think a lot of the buildings we create are very similar to that hamburger. Is they're functional, but they're not used as an accelerant to enhance our mind health, our body health, societal health, and ecological health. And so I think the book is working specifically to try and radiate the messages based on research in cognitive sciences, which is the science of the mind, and neuroscience, which is the science of the brain, on, in fact, how we, like the burger, how we consume our environments, and how they can create the conditions of which we can thrive and prosper.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing about that, Tye. Nick and I each got a chance to kind of get a behind the scenes pre-release peek at your book, and for that, we're very grateful. Some of the building categories that you talked about in there really stood out to me as having a big impact on our daily lives. One of them being the education setting. And I saw a couple different project examples in your book, but can you talk to us a little bit about the impacts that the educational settings have on learning environments and on our mental health that comes from that?
Well, definitely. And so what we've chosen to look at the very large scale on how we create the cities, on where we come together. One of the projects in it is a project we're looking at on solving the two floods of Venice, a master plan for the ancient city of Venice. It deals with two floods, the flood of water due to climate change, and secondly, around the flooding of mass tourism that's decimating the city. So that's the big scale, but we also look down at the scale of the home, and then education facilities, as well as the places that we heal. But if I just step back slightly, what the book is working to do is it dives into really research in the emerging intersection of neuroscience and architecture. And it explores how our mind and its various sensory systems interact with our built environments, like our schools, to enhance or harm our health and our well-being. And just for a little context, that, you know, your biological brain is physically housed in your skull. But recent research has revealed that the mind, which is the brain's operating system, extends out through and beyond your body to engage with your surroundings, which raises important questions about how we create the places where we live, learn, and study. And we need to what it's trying to do is bridge the knowledge gap between, you know, the therapeutic medical world and the design community, to outline how we can intentionally shape our environments to support our physical and neurological health. And as a result of that, create the conditions, for example, in schools where how we can study and learn and work better. And so if you get into it a little further, specifically in learning environments, and in fact, around the idea of timber and mass timber, it's interesting because for me is that environments, when you walk into any environment, when you walk through the threshold of the door, you have cognitive and precognitive, subconscious reactions to the space. You know, that gut feeling that you have. That's your body telling your mind about what it's anticipating the experience to be. Some environments they make you feel good and give you that extra spring in your step, and others suck the life out of you. There is no such thing as neutral space. It can be an accelerant for ecological, societal, um, physical and mind health. And good environments, they do a lot of things to your psychological and physiological conditions, like that preconscious or subconscious reactions. And what does that mean? Well, good environments reduce your cortisol levels, and that has a relationship to stress and the anxiety hormone. They decrease your blood pressure, your heart rate, meaning in a positive way. And in fact, it helps enhance your immune system. It increases memory, learning, and strengthens your neural network, and called neural regeneration, and which is the process of forming neurons, and importantly, the synapse connections between the neurons in your brains. Your space, the spaces you occupy do that, which is tied back to a concept called environmental enrichment. And what that means is I called Donald Herb in the 1940s, he took lab rats from his lab back home and put them in a cage with toys and things to run around. And he compared their brains compared to the lab rats, which were in impoverished environments, the others known as an enriched environment with all the playthings and activities. And he measured that against a control group that was sort of in the middle. After a month, he dissected the brains, and what did he discover? He found that the lab mice that after a month that were in the enriched environments where they could run around with wheels to spin, is that the synapses, which are important connections between the neurons in the brain, very important, back to this idea of neurogenesis, is that the synapse grew over the span of a month. They increased by about 25%. I mean, that's remarkable. The mice that were in the impoverished environments, in fact, the synapse connections withered the same way as a plant does without water or sun. So if I came to you in the business that you run and say you have 100 employees, and I said, I can increase the performance of the people in your organization as a result of the environment by 25%, would that be of value to you? If you look back to the education environments, for example, using materials, and what do they do to you? Think of wood, for example, and what are the physiological and psychological benefits of wood and environmental enrichment. It's very interesting for me is that with the presence of it in the environment, students increase their well-being, they improve their learning score outcomes, it reduces anxiety and stress levels, improves learning, social interaction, test performance compared to spaces mostly with artificial finishes. Back to the idea of the impoverished environments is that these things are superchargers that change performance. And so we need to move away from the idea of these transactional spaces of learning environments, like probably the things you and I went through, which are called cells and bells, where you have a corridor with all the cells, or I should say the classrooms that are lined up. They're rectangular. There's a bell goes off, and like the little mice, you run from one to the other. You walk into the room, you're lined up facing the teacher. Those things come from a model from the Industrial Revolution in the late 1800s, and they continue on. They're outdated. They don't help performance. It's not the way we learn. And if we want to be able to face all of these significant challenges that we're facing, we hear in the news on a daily basis, we need to create the conditions of which we can thrive and flourish. And space is a neutral, it can be an accelerant to enhance them, specifically in learning.
Another word that I think demands definition. We really appreciate you having you here, because for a lot of people that don't know, you were the first Canadian architect to have earned a Master of Neuroscience in Applied Architectural Design at the University of Venice, and also have a Masters of Architecture in Urban Design at Harvard. And I think that you're really bridging the gap of a new age where what you just kind of talked about, the living environment matters. And there was another word in your book that I hope that you can define a little bit further, and it's called hortophilia. What does that mean to somebody that maybe doesn't know?
Well, hortophilia relates to another term that we hear a lot, which is around biophilia. And so the concept of biophilia says that that when we're in natural environments, they are fantastic for our cognitive abilities. They lower our blood pressure and a bunch of physiological aspects. They increase a lot of psychological aspects, and it ties back to an idea of the complexity of the landscape that we see around us. And so landscapes have what are called fractal patterns. And so what does that mean? Think of a tree that grows up and it has a trunk and then goes into a bunch of branches. Off the branches come a number of, finer, smaller branches. And then, in the pattern of a leaf, it has smaller and smaller patterns. That seems to be that we are really hardwired for specifically. And if the complexity of those patterns are at a sweet spot, like nature often is, it is an extraordinary accelerant for our mind. And if it's too complex, it becomes complicated and confusing, and it's not good for us. If it's very simple, then we get bored with it. There is a professor in Oregon, a very interesting guy that began to look at fractal pattern complexity. And what he showed was that there is this mid-range zone that is very good for stimulating creativity, on and on and on. And in fact, what he did was started studying nature, but then started looking at Jackson Pollock paintings. Jackson Pollock paintings, as you remember, is the modern painter that used to have a brush, and he would drip the paint in circles onto a canvas that's on the floor. Jackson Pollock paintings sell for tens and tens of millions of dollars. He was trying to figure out why they're so valuable. Why are people attracted to them? What he discovered was the fractal complexity of Jackson Pollock paintings are absolutely at the same sweet spot that we see in nature when we go out for a walk. This ties into Japan. There's a concept called forest bathing, which enhances your health and well-being. But that then goes into this concept of hortophilia. And hortophilia has arrived from a doctor in New York City that's dealing with dementia patients that have a lot of very complex problems that can be violent and aggressive. What he found was that if we brought these patients out into the adjacent garden next to the institute that they're in, and not only was immersed in nature, but also got their hands into the soil and tending nature, that again, it had significant changes to the physiological and psychological conditions of those patients, reducing violence, creating calm, more relaxed. And that ties into another concept that we're involved with right now, which is called in-breathment. We're dealing with a neuroscientist just north of Tel Aviv who's developed this concept in which if the space can begin to represent your breathing in and exhaling at a relaxed position, that again, it reduces a lot of negative things around claustrophobia. For example, if you're in a CT simulation suite or CT machine, having treatment, because most of us, 10% of adults, 40% of children have claustrophobia. If you can visualize your breath, we're working with him to have the architecture to move, at a wave-like pattern, which is the same, a wall, that we're actively involved with, if it does that and it represents like a wave, that pattern of in and out, that the physiological and psychological conditions are extraordinary. So all of those things are related back to nature, back to, outside nature, as well as our internal nature or breathing, for example.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that a lot of people are really starting to see and appreciate the concepts that you just talked about. So thank you for shining a light on them. I'm curious, how did you get into this field? It seems that for a long time, there was this shift kind of away from nature and architecture. And this is from an outside perspective, because I am definitely not an architect. But when I look at larger, bigger buildings, they have that very cold industrial feel, and the style shifts depending on which decade you're looking in. But what do you think is driving this shift and this focus, and especially for you, back into this type of thinking?
Well, a number of years ago, we a couple of projects we have done got a lot of international attention. Some was glulam, and they looked like great tree-like structures, and a lot of attention from them. And I knew that, these environments changed how you felt when you walked in, because afterwards we were talking to a lot of people, sort of post-occupancy, and they were just so enthusiastic on how this environment gave them a little spring in their step when they were in it, made them feel better on a variety of different fronts. And I knew that intuitively. And I began digging, but intuitively everybody says, okay, where's the evidence for it? Is this just some architect imagining this stuff? Well, certainly the people were telling me that, and I knew it in my gut that the environment changes your perception, this sort of cognitive side. And the other thing, and then I came across, which is maybe 20 years old, the intersection of neuroscience and architecture. There's a body in the United States based at the Salk Institute that has global chapters called the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture. And it's a mix of architects and neuroscientists that are exploring perception, cognition, but importantly, that we are embodied, meaning that back to the idea that our brain is in our skull, but our mind is through our body, through our skin, understands our proprioceptive, our reactions, and our kinetics in space. It's like you can sense the bookshelf behind you. So that body is 20 years old. So I started reading about it, and then the University of Venice, it started a new program, this Master of Neuroscience, applied to architecture and design. I went and met the director of it in Venice. It was just finishing the first year of the program, so brand new. This was just before COVID. So I applied, got accepted, and I could be in the program as a fly-in student. So I was in Venice while I was still running my practice, art practice. As a fly-in student, I was in Venice 1 week a month. So we had projects across Canada. In Europe, we've got a dozen projects in Europe, all the way through to Israel, half a dozen projects there. So I would present with our clients. I'd have meetings in Israel, then go to Venice for a week, go to Dublin to work with our clients there, back to Toronto and Vancouver, and then do the cycle again. But it was amazing revelation for me, because we were taught by the world's leading neuroscientists, cognitive scientists, sociologists, psychologists, I mean the world's leading ones. And suddenly, all of this stuff that I knew in my stomach, that gut feeling, was supported by science. And so the journey has been that this was a great revolution. The information was extraordinary. There was a lot of ideas and things there that I then said, I need to disseminate this. And the book has one purpose, is to take this information and put it to a wide audience. And importantly, to say that the book is 80,000 words, 300 pages, but it equally has 380 photos or diagrams, meaning that it is designed to be a very immersive document. It is very accessible. It's got a great glossary of terms. It's got 50 other books that you can read if you're interested. It's got a great biography, but it is designed in a way that it can be a textbook for students in architecture or cognitive scientists. It can be for professionals, they're architects, engineers, or people in the cognitive science zone. But importantly, it is designed that it can simply be a beautiful coffee table book that the general public can grab, can walk into it and look at it in the middle and learn something. You can pair the pictures and the text together. So it's really trying to make these ideas very, very accessible. And the way that it's written is very, very accessible. And I hope interesting, like the reference about the whale and us spending time underwater. It's got a lot of stuff like that. It says, wow, this is extraordinary. Maybe I should pay a little more attention to the spaces that I work or heal or live, because space is an accelerant that can change the way that you and I want to stay and talk for, longer periods or hang around or solve these complex areas, or it can suck the life out of us. Most of the spaces we work in are like that. In fact, that's why people don't want to go back to the offices. They want to stay at home in environments, in fact, that make them feel fantastic and enhance their performance.
Well, we are excited to hit buy when it does come out, because you're exactly right. I mean, it can sit on a coffee table and just spark good conversation. I feel like that you can open up to any page and feel like that you're not lost. There's just bite-sized pieces of learning that are really powerful. And a lot of your famous projects, mass timber projects and timber projects, are published in the book. And so there's a lot of really cool eye candy. One thing, tell me if I was dreaming. I don't think I am, though, but your famous this famous cancer center, the SCMC Helmsley Cancer Center in Jerusalem, Israel, also codenamed or nicknamed the Butterfly. Aren't there a part of the building, you talked about embreathment, where you focus on breathing, but isn't there a portion of that building where it actually is moving and it looks like that it is breathing itself?
It is. As we're in the thick of this right now. So the Cancer Center is open and active in treating patients in Israel. And in fact, I'd like to just mention in the context of where we are, we've worked in Israel for probably 10 years. And I can tell you it's a country that when I land, I'm very excited to be there. The people that I work with treat me extremely well. They're probably one of the greatest clients I've had, and in fact, some of the great friends. And I just say that in the tragedy that we see unfolding right now. So let's hope that resolves itself for everybody. The ideas of embreathment we have used within the CT suite. We are using some ideas of that on another project that, in fact, the building is kinetic and it moves and it breathes with you. So think of being in a classroom in a school where that, in fact, one of the walls has movement to it, and the rhythm of it moves to a terrific rhythm that is perfect for body and cognitive enhancement. And as neuroscientists, as I said, Mehdi is one of the leading thinkers in the world in that zone. And he shows through CT scans of brains, of MRIs, how the brain changes as a result. So that is really firmly actively happening right now. But really what we're trying to do is explore what causes health. And what if health was the basis of every way that we would judge any type of building, any public space? And what if we stopped tolerating these working environments that cause boredom and dis-ease? I use that word very specifically, and depression, and start looking at how do buildings make us feel and how they make us feel better? Because again, that idea that there's no neutral space. What we build affects how we experience the world, and therefore either causes or undermines health. And in the past, we've had attitudes towards health that were holistic. All the way back to traditional Chinese medicine, and they were salutogenic. And salutogenic is the word saludo in Genesis, health, Spanish, or Latin, and through into Genesis, the origins, which is the opposite of pathogenic. Patho in Genesis is disease, the origins of disease. Right now, Western medicine has embraced pathogenics, the causes of disease. Medical researchers have identified 8,000 known causes of disease or symptoms of disease. But interestingly, they've only discovered 80 causes of health. We find what we look for. We're in a pathogenic view that has come over the last 100 years, and that is changing dramatically. Look at the watch that you have. All the high-tech companies are moving into how do we monitor our sleep and our health and our heart rate and all the things. This pathogenic view is like the architecture that you were mentioning a minute ago, the glass office towers. They're an old concept that is 100 years old. We are fundamentally on a new frontier where we can create high performance buildings, but human performance buildings that are nutrient rich, that are accelerants for optimal health. And we can transform our buildings in that direction. And so I believe right now, today, we need to reimagine together a new path forward, whereby placemaking is conceived fundamentally as a health generating system that at its roots is an accelerant for psychological as well as physical and biological well-being. And that's for your and my physical health, but it is also for societal health, creating not only the homes that we live, the schools that we learn in, the places we work, hospitals we heal, but also the city streets and the city squares and the neighborhoods that we come together to share ideas and try and solve a lot of these complex projects or problems, as we've been discussing, that we see in front of us on a daily basis that push us apart instead of using it to help bring us together.
Well, I'm very excited to see this new frontier unfold. I know that there's a lot of work ongoing. There's a lot of work that's planned. And so thank you for making more of these concepts accessible to the people that are going to be in charge of shaping that entire frontier for us. On that note, what advice would you have for the architects, the engineers, the contractors, the developer owners, the people that are shaping the built environment moving forward? What advice or outlook would you impart to those people that are responsible for shaping these types of decisions?
I think a couple of things. And, in the book that we have at the back, as you've mentioned, we have some case studies. And what the case studies are trying to show and reviews our buildings. And the reason I've done that is specifically to say that, look, here is a practitioner. I'm a practitioner. I build buildings. And I'm wrestling with these ideas. I don't know all the answers. I'm on a journey trying to discover them. The book is helping me to do that. And the study in Venice was a way to do that. But the projects at the back are trying to show examples of how you can connect the dots between these ideas. The important thing to note that the projects that are shown there are primarily for, in the health zone, they're mostly for not-for-profit companies. Some of the Canadian zone, some in Israel, as you've mentioned. These people don't have a lot of money to execute their projects. The education projects that are shown are similar. These people don't have a lot of money. And so often people say, well, these ideas are all great and the projects look fantastic. Well, you must have clients with a ton of money. I don't have clients with a lot of money. And that in building any building and making decisions, it's like your shopping list at home, that there's a lot of things that you'd love to do, but you can't afford them. But you have to decide what are the priorities on them. And that's a very important message in the sense that these ideas are about putting firm and right central, how do we use our environment to enhance health, to increase social activity, enhance memory as a result of the way that we create places. And there's only one place to start, is to begin to step into it, begin to have discussions with your clients around what that looks like and what it means. We talk about a pseudo-systemic approach to design. And what that means is pseudo, back to the idea of solace and pseudogenesis, meaning health, and systemic, meaning a system. And so it's important to have a healthy approach to design, but it's also important to have a healthy approach to the design process. And what I mean by that is we have a very co-creation process. We never start with a design with a client. We walk in with the client, with 30 people, and begin discussing what are we trying to achieve with this project. And then we drill down eventually into using big models with blocks to co-create the process together. So you have to start somewhere, but just begin to start talking about what causes health, not just ecological, that's very important, but what creates the conditions of which we can thrive and prosper together. And hopefully the book will help give people more tools to get into those discussions.
Absolutely. I think it absolutely arms them with the tools to have those discussions with the clients. So the book is coming out in the pre-launch phase right now, and then people will be able to pick it up sometime next spring. But you've spent a tremendous amount of time and effort putting this resource together, and I'm sure you'll have a tremendous amount of effort and time getting it out to the public. But what's next for you? What are you looking to accomplish and tackle next?
Back to this idea of breathment, this idea where buildings can be less static and a little more alive. And in fact, where we're at, it's not a very complex thing. So we're focused on that, how that translates into our buildings specifically that we're involved with. I'm also out actively, like today, talking to a variety of different people. Saturday, I'm off to New Zealand. We have a 4-city speaking tour to a wide range of different people. Then on to New Zealand New Zealand first, and off to Australia. But 4 cities there, just trying to disseminate this information. So what I'm trying to do is again shift that concept of what placemaking and architecture is about. That's one of my big focuses beyond the work that we're doing in our practice with some great clients, literally globally.
Well, you're a busy guy that's traveling the globe, very renowned speaker, and it's fascinating to listen to you. With a little bit of luck and a little bit of schedule opening, maybe we can twist your arm enough to get you back out here to Denver to talk about the all the health benefits of timber and everything in our event. But until then,
Well, if there's one spot that, and it's not going to take a lot of arm twisting, that where you are is such a gorgeous environment, of which I haven't been there, and it would be a great pleasure to have my arm twisted, and you won't need a lot of it to get me to join you and to continue on the discussions we started today.
Yeah, it really is a stunning place. I've been here at the Denver area for about 2 years, and it's gorgeous, especially the the mountains, to the west. And but yeah, it sounds like we'll get you out here again. On a different note, though, maybe coming up earlier in your career, or maybe just in the last few years or few months, is there a book? Is there a podcast, a show? Is there some sort of like educational piece that really shaped you? It changed your mind. It really got you going down a different direction than you never thought was possible. Does anything come to mind?
There's a lady who wrote a fantastic book. I was there 2 weeks ago in San Diego. Her name is Sarah Williams Goldhagen. She's a New York Times writer. She's written a best-selling book that really, in fact, it is what got me going into down the stream and doing the Master of Neuroscience applied to architecture. She has written a best-selling book that's called Welcome to Your World, How the Built Environment Shapes Our Lives. It's a fantastic book. It's a very accessible book, very interesting book about, again, what the environment does to you, with a big sort of overlay on the neuroscience side. I think she's one of the pioneers in this area of research and journalism. A very fine writer, an extraordinary person. In fact, she has been very kind to review the book, and I talk about generosity in the book. She wrote back and said that generosity is a very interesting idea. Maybe you should expand that a bit into the concept of dignity, architecture and dignity, and which I did. And I think dignity is a very important generosity in architecture. There's not a lot of a lot of examples of streets or buildings that are generous to us. Dignity is another thing. And that's not just a level of your abilities, meaning we're all handicapped. I read these things on. We all have various levels. It's if you're young, that's if you're old, maybe if you've come from somewhere else. The idea of intentionally having dignity as a centered place of what we do in the creation of space. And I think that's linked to the idea of just being generous to each other, but how that translates into placemaking is a central focus of what we should be for.
I couldn't agree more. Generosity is so key and central to who we are as people, who we are as humans, and how we interact in a community. And I think that your journey of sharing everything that you've learned with the next generation, with the wider world, is a great example of that. When you were coming up, and I know you mentioned a couple names already, but were there any mentors or people that inspired you along the way that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, there's a couple of people. My father was an architect, and he's a retired architect. And I think this whole idea of salutogenesis, well, he certainly didn't know the concept, nor did I, growing up. I think that's very rooted in his genes, tied back to the idea of generosity. and learning architecture at an early stage from him, but more so than when I did my undergrad at the University of Toronto. I did my thesis under a guy called Eberhard Seidler. And Eb Seidler studied at the Bauhaus, came to Canada, is a renowned architect in Canada, got the gold medal, and has built buildings around the world that are greatly celebrated on every continent. And he's passed away when an extraordinary book. He got the Lifetime Achievement from an organization, gave me the Protégé Award. He started an office in London. I went there and was one of the early people while it's set up. He was a great influence because he tied together the idea of architecture and humanism. That it was architecture is central to the idea of people that occupy. Often we see a lot of stuff on Instagram or other things that, is about snapping a photo or other things, but he probably subconsciously rooted the idea of, buildings, how do they make you feel and how can they create the conditions of where we can thrive, where we come together, where we want to be. So he will certainly an extremely influence on my thinking, and hopefully some of his ideas, which I'm sure I borrowed. Hopefully I've been able to allow them to flower and blossom a little more. And hopefully I can then, as he did, take those and pass them on to somebody else and to others to keep advancing his thinking.
Well, thank you for that. Before we ask our last question, where can people find or connect with you? Would you rather them go to your LinkedIn and follow your work there, or maybe somebody wants to work with you specifically? How should they connect?
LinkedIn is a fantastic platform. Please go through that because the messaging service is great. And then what I do is I just bounce people my email, and then we can connect together. My Instagram, we're posting a lot of information there. Again, trying to disseminate. You can go to our website. It's got a lot of information there to share. There's links back. So farrowpartners.ca. I'm happy to hear from anybody. And if I can pass information on or share stuff or answer questions or do whatever I can do, it would be a great pleasure.
Perfect. That I highly recommend people following your LinkedIn or your Twitter account. That's how I came across your work. You just have stunning work all over the globe, and started following you for a while and just getting educated. So thank you for all your posts. They really do matter. Our last question is, if you had the power to change anything in your industry, name one thing and why would you change it?
It's back again to just changing the way we view the environments we create. There's a lot of emphasis, as I mentioned a little earlier, about creating high performance buildings and what's the carbon footprint, which obviously timber is a fantastic thing. And what's the relationship with what we build to our ecological footprint. And I'm firmly behind that. In fact, obviously our timber buildings, we were created some of the largest, most highly rated LEED buildings in the early days of that system, Green Building Council. And we need to be focused on that. But what I'm trying to do is just to refocus the public and the profession's view that we need to focus on optimal health. And what is optimal health in my definition? Optimal health is like a tabletop. Health, like a beautiful vase, I suppose with flowers on it, is optimal health sitting on that tabletop as a metaphor. But the lengths of the tabletop reflects design's relationship to four things. So one leg of supporting the table relates to design's impact on ecological health. We talk a lot about that. The second leg is design's relationship to physical health, your body. And we know the creation of car-dominated suburbs and stuff has raised a whole tsunami of chronic diseases that are washing across our society. That's the second leg, supporting the table of optimal health. The third leg is physical health and design's role, allowing us to ambulate and move and to be healthy. We can do that intentionally, places we want to walk and move, or others we want to avoid and drive through. And the fourth leg is design's role in mind health. And the important thing is that we need to look at all of these. That ties back to an idea also, planetary health. And what I mean about the metaphor, the analogy of the tabletop of health sitting on top of that, supported by these four legs, you need all four legs. You take out one of those legs and optimal health collapses. That tabletop, like a glass vase, crashes on the floor. And so I'm hoping that we will not only look at what design does to ecological health, but what does it do to societal health, physical health, and importantly, mind health, because that's where everything comes through.
Well, you said it, and going through your website a little bit, there's something that really stood out to me is you talked about how your roots were established over 50 years ago. Farrow Partners is a full-service architecture and master planning firm based in Toronto, working internationally. You offer a full range of services in architecture, interior, and design master planning. But the common thread, the biggest thing is you create wow buildings, just very inspiring and health conscious, health forward buildings. That's just unbelievable. We can't wait to see what you come up with in the future. And thank you so much for having us, talking to us. We appreciate you being on the podcast.
I've enjoyed it. And I mean, on that, we are laser focused on one thing. What's the relationship to what we build and how can it actively cause health? That is the lens that we view everything that we do in the office. And I look forward to seeing you in the new year in Denver in person and move away from our virtual side of things. But thanks for the time. And thank you for having me and sharing the conversation.
Absolutely. Well, we'll see you around, partner. Take care.